This is On Diversity, a podcast series by the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore. This is the second episode of the second season, and I'm your host, Liang Kaixin. Today's episode is on stay-at-home dads, and we have a stay-at-home dad with us today, and the spouse of a stay-at-home dad. First, we have Kelvin Seah. He is a writer, stay-home father of two, and a young lecturer. He used to teach communications in the Polytechnic for 12 years. We also have Dr. Tam Wai Jia. Her husband Cliff left his career in IT and pastoring to be a stay-home dad and is in the midst of completing his theological studies. Welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start off with Kelvin because we saw Kelvin's commentary on Today previously, and you quoted a report from the Institute of Policy Studies about stay-at-home dad. And I think you mentioned that it threw out at least two interesting insights about societal perceptions of gender roles in the family. And you also mentioned about there may be some kind of like stigma from the society, friends, and even parents-in-laws. So what do you think are some of the main misconceptions and stigmas you face as a stay-at-home father?
Okay, where do I begin?
Sounds like a very big question.
Yeah, it is kind of a huge question. And I can't necessarily say that my experiences mirror those of every other stay-at-home father, as well those who were featured in that Institute of Policy Studies report you mentioned. But I think I'm struck by the fact that once you get into a role like this, which is a stepping away of what is considered a norm, then you automatically find yourself in a kind of a different space. And for me, I think looking back, I find that I am used to having a full-time career, and then to suddenly drop off from that was one sea change for me. And what that meant a lot of times was having to kind of explain or justify how it is that I'm not in that job anymore. I'm kind of free. And I love the fact, I shouldn't be saying this, but I think I love the fact that when COVID happened, right, it actually made it easier for me. Let me explain why I say that. Before, when COVID hadn't come, if I am seen during, like, say, office hours moving around the neighborhood, right, people would be wondering, what is this person doing, casually dressed? Is he out of a job? Is he retrenched between jobs and all that? And then when COVID hits, right, like my neighbors say, oh, wow, you've casually dressed, working from home right now. So I've experienced with people asking me, are you ever going to go back to a full-time job? Or was it really necessary that you do this? Take a step back. Why can't your wife do that? Actually, what really happened? Are you like having troubles in the workplace? Maybe you couldn't cut it in the workforce. You are taking a break. Or are you just downright lazy? You're trying to benefit from your wife who's going to work full-time? Or is it she's earning bigger bucks than you are? So these are some of the stigmas that invariably will come into the discussion. I won't say that I've directly experienced these, but when you think about the climate that we live in Singapore and Asia, then it's not too much of a stretch to recognize some of these signs of how people view someone like a stay-home father, more so than, say, a stay-home mother. Yeah.
Okay. But how do you cope with all this? And later on, I'll ask Wai Jia also, like, what's your experience like also? Yeah. So, Kelvin, how do you cope with all these thoughts about you staying at home?
I think it's still something that is unfolding. I've been at it now for about 3 years. I think it's easier in the sense that people have gotten used to it. And if I can say, I think back in 2017, the Ministry of Manpower statistics showed that about 4 in 1,000 men in Singapore are stay-home fathers. I suspect the number is actually higher. I still teach part-time at the Polytechnics, right? Then you can always pass yourself off with those titles. And you get away with it because then you don't have to declare upfront that, oh, I'm a stay-home father. Although with COVID, everybody is a stay-home parent, right? So how I cope is, well, the part-time work is one way to cope in the sense that you still kind of get back a little bit of that gender masculinity kind of thing. So you're not really this strange creature that is fully at home, domesticated. I think we live in a society where people feel that you have to justify your hours. You have to justify why you are doing this. So you need to fill up your calendar. You need to make sure that it's all filled up. You're doing laundry and you're fetching the kids to and from school. So there's that added pressure. And I think that's always been for centuries, especially on the men, because men are viewed as the breadwinners, the family protectors, the ones who in terms of body shape and ability to control a little bit more expected to be able to perform those roles better than the women. Not to say that the women cannot. In the current climate, I will not dare to say that. Don't go there, you know. So there's that quality, but that's the reality. I thank my wife for that because I think she played a big role, because the decision for me to be a stay-at-home father 3 years ago is definitely not one that was made in isolation. She had to be very much involved, and I have to get her green light for that too. Because honestly, right, at that point in time, I was still having a greater earning power than she was, which kind of bucks the trend. A lot of fathers who became stay-at-home fathers partly did it because their wives were earning more than they were. But that's not my case. Mine was a conventional case. So it adds a layer of mystery as to why would you do this? So I am grateful to my wife for allowing me this time to do so. Because I mean, she did it when the kids were really young, initial toddler years, and she was working half-time and no pay leave and things like that. So I thought, it's my turn. And I think we've always worked on that basis in my family. So, but for outsiders, they would struggle to kind of deal with that. So I have to kind of manage when I'm with people, how much to tell them. If it gets a bit too much, especially maybe those are the older generations, and I include my own peer generation in that category by new, then I would say, okay, I'm an adjunct lecturer. That sounds a bit more socially acceptable than to say I'm a stay-at-home father. But I identify with that first. I want to make that very clear.
Okay. So over to you, Wai Jia. So your husband is a stay-home dad. And I mean, after hearing from Kelvin, what kind of misconceptions do you face and did your husband face as a stay-home dad?
Wow, you know, whenever I hear Kelvin speak and when I read his writing, you know, it just prompts so many thoughts and emotions inside of me because I think we resonate so much. In fact, after Kelvin's article, I wrote the commentary in, and that's how Kelvin and my husband are now very good friends.
That's super cool. You guys met because of 2 commentaries.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. But I would say that I resonate a lot with what Kelvin has shared. And actually, there is a huge misconception that, you know, when a man is not working in the marriage, that either is something wrong with the marriage or there's something wrong with the man himself. And I think that is difficult for a man and his wife, like myself, to confront. The other thing is that Kelvin brought up that I resonate with is that there's a very strong identity that is tied to our work status. Like, I am first and foremost who? I am a doctor, or I am a teacher, or I am who? But I think this whole experience has really challenged us to rethink who we are. And at the core of ourselves, what is our identity? And so that kind of brings me and my husband to very deep conversations that we've had, that at the core of our marriage, who are we as individuals and what do we celebrate? And so maybe I'm jumping the gun. I'm talking about how we cope with these misconceptions and stigmas. And I think one of the key ways that we do so is really having these frank and deep conversations that, so my husband is Cliff. I say, Cliff, what do you value? And he asks me, like, what do I value? And there are days that are tough. There are days where I remember in the early days of our adjustment, Cliff came home from the supermarket one day and he was clearly quite disturbed. And I asked him what happened. And he said that there was this elderly auntie at the cashier. And she just burst out in saying to him, "Oh, I see you here every day. You must be a housewife." And Cliff said it just struck him at the point that who was he? And the fact was that she didn't even have the verbiage to describe him as a stay-at-home dad. She literally used the word housewife. I think that kind of made me realize that something that's really lacking in our culture or society at the moment is the right verbiage to talk about such things. So recently I've been following and reading Susan David's bestseller book, which is Emotional Agility. And in that book, she says there's this powerful, beautiful word in South Africa called sawubona. And that literally is a Zulu greeting, like hello, but it actually means I see you. And I feel like when we say I see you, what does it mean? It's giving somebody affirmation. It's a validation. It's saying I see you deep inside of you and I affirm you for who you are. But when we don't have the verbiage in society to describe stay-at-home dads, for example, to openly talk about it, to say, what do stay-at-home dads do? What is the kind of dynamic like and all that? And this invisibility is not just painful, but it is dangerous because then there is an entire group of people that you don't see. And when you don't see them, that is how stigma and guilt and worse shame is created. And so little things, I feel like having the right verbiage to describe them, but also in terms of society, like for example, when my husband was looking for playgroups, for example, for our little ones. So we have two very little girls. They are 2 and 4. And looking for like playgroups, right? You want kids to, this was before COVID. And the struggle I had was that so many groups were called mums and tots.
Oh, what about dads?
Yeah, I know. So what about dads, right?
There you go.
Yeah, so I would go there and I'll be like, so like, I almost feel guilty asking this, because they would look at me and they'd be like, how come you're not coming? And I'm like, yeah, this is kind of like my last week. Is it okay if my husband comes next week? And I kind of feel like this stigma also, right? Like, are you like, you should be there, right? And I'm like, can my husband come? And then when I think about it, I think to myself, it's going to be awkward. It's going to be awkward for Cliff, even if he's there. Because the fact is that he'll be the only man, right? How is everybody going to look at him? And while he's a very brave, secure, stoic kind of man, in my eyes, he's very masculine. He's like the man. Like he's an Iron Man. He's done triathlons, he's a very manly man, But when he goes into that situation, I'm like, do I really want to put him through that? And my hope is that we can create a society where both men and women are celebrated for who they are and that each of them can function in whatever season that life throws at them best. Because right now I'm the sole breadwinner, but there could be a time where, for example, when we were overseas for some time, I was a stay-at-home mom. And I faced the same stigma because I was at one point I had just graduated from Johns Hopkins with my Masters of Public Health and all. It was a very high kind of public visibility kind of role. And then suddenly I dropped into, stay-at-home mom. I truly grappled with it. And so in that season, Cliff was working. And I just wish that in our day and age, that man and wife can toggle between different seasons of their lives seamlessly and with joy, with courage, but with pride also, without this fear of misconceptions or stigmas in society.
Well, Jia, you mentioned about masculinity, so I'm going to direct it to Kelvin. I think
Sure, why not? The man in the room. Right? Let's go.
I think you also mentioned about masculinity a lot of times. So what do you think that this has affected yourself, like about your identity and also about gender norms?
About 3 years ago, as a sociology professor at Albany College in Michigan, United States, published a book called Manhood Impossible. And it was interesting because he did a nationwide across America study where he interviewed and spoke to many men who were at a crossroads or at different points in their lives. And these were men who, in the course of his survey and study, helped him to draw the conclusion that all things being equal, generally the conception or the perception of what masculinity is defined by two areas. One is the idea that of your body shape and your control. So it's physicality. That's the masculine definition. Then the other factor is the breadwinning status. So these two things, body and breadwinner, together define masculinity. And it was interesting that in pursuing those men who either fell short on one or both of these factors and these categories, he found that there were generally 4 responses from these men in trying to come to terms with where they are in terms of not quite meeting or fulfilling these 2 categories all the time. One was how these men would either internalize. So when you internalize, of course, then unfortunately you probably go into depression, you feel very isolated because you are not either a breadwinner or you're not body shape acceptable in the larger society. Then the second category would be those who try to resist or try to make up for it, Either they take up boxing or they go into a fight club. So fight clubs are pretty popular in American cultures, right?
Gotta be violent.
But that outwardly expression to try and regain back that masculine definition for themselves. And then there are those who are unfortunately sink into even worse situations where they really end up in domestic violence because they take it out on their families. And unfortunately, that's quite a prevalent situation in America. And unfortunately, with COVID, I think suspect these cases have actually multiplied. And then the last category would be those who decide to redefine what it is to be a male, a masculine. And I think that at least for myself, when I think about this whole issue of masculinity, I think it's a very fascinating issue, which unfortunately in this part of the world, be it policymakers or the powers that be, not enough focus is on this aspect, because I think it's important. We need to kind of do a study to examine, so what are the modern day perceptions of what a masculine or what a male is versus what it was maybe 20, 30 years ago. And I think that the time has come where we need to start to redefine what we mean by it. Is it really just purely breadwinning, embody physicality? Because if it is, it really narrows the scope tremendously. And honestly, a lot of men don't quite live up to that all the time. And I think to a certain degree, we kind of gloss over it, or we just sweep it under the carpet, because men are supposed to just get down and do it. But I don't think that holds anymore in this current climate. And a lot of young men who are rising up, into their 20s and 30s now, who are going to move into positions of importance and authority, we need to re-examine what it means to be a man. And I think that making the decision I made has opened me up to this realization that I need to redefine, because if I don't redefine it right, but I succumb to society's views on who I am, how I should behave, it creates a lot of stress factors, and there'll be cracks, and the marriage, the family, the parenting, all that, all intertwined, and it's going to get affected potentially negatively to the detriment of society. We need to give ourselves the breathing space to say that we can expand the definition. Sure, I'm not economically as productive, if you go by pure numbers, pure KPIs, which here in our culture we're so into. But what about new KPIs? What about new ways of measuring our worth and value?
Wow,
if I
so
dare
good.
to even say,
so good.
maybe it's time we put a dollar value to it. Come on. I mean, for centuries, mothers have been holding up their own in the hearth, helping take care of the home, the family, and they don't get a penny, So maybe it's time we redress it. So I'm not just saying this for my benefit. I'm saying for any stay-home parent, be you a father
who is
or
working,
mom.
who's sort of working at home, who's
give
doing
us
domestic work, right?
Give us a stipend, if nothing else, to, as a society, declare that we recognize your value, because your value is immeasurable. It isn't something you can just balance the account. It's not numbers strictly, but if you give us some kind of a recognition that what society can see, then you say, finally we are turning the tide around. Society say, okay, look, this is how we value our people. It's like looking, really seeing you, into you, and the value that you bring. You're raising the next generation. Come on. I mean, we all talk about the importance of that, right? Raising children well and stuff like that. And there are tons and tons of longitudinal studies that shows what happens in a society where there's an absentee parent, be it the male or the female, but particularly a lot of social ills and problems arise because of the absentee fathers. That's proven. There's no dispute about it. So if we recognize that, then why aren't we putting our money where our mouth is? I mean, you say that you want to support, but you're not really showing any tangible. We still get stigmatized, So I think enough is enough. I think we need to reach it. But I think it's a tough one. But I guess maybe I'm sticking my corner in my work to say that I'm speaking up for that. I think that we should finally recognize that there are multiple definitions. And if you are helping to raise the next generation well, then accord us that courtesy, that respect, that due recognition that we are making contributions, even if it's not immediately economically calculable.
Yeah, I think, Kelvin, as you shared, I just thought to myself that it is so courageous of you to redefine masculinity, because it is people like yourselves. I mean, in your generation, right? I mean, you're obviously older than us, but in your generation,
a little bit.
I mean,
It's true.
But what I'm saying is that in your generation, the stigma must have been even more greater in a way. And I just want to thank you for your courage, for just going the way ahead, to pave the way ahead in terms of, redefining masculinity. In a sense, I don't know, like for myself as a bit younger, I do see that I feel hopeful for the next generation, because even right now, I see a lot of young fathers. Even the recent Father's Day, that was how our commentaries got out. Like, there was so much coverage on hands-on parenting, on stay-at-home dads. And for me, it was a change in the tide that finally says that there is more focus or attention that's given to this. And as Kelvin was sharing about the importance of dads in the house, I've been reading a couple of different papers, and the research shows that in comparison to children with less involved fathers, children with involved and loving fathers have higher levels of psychological well-being and better cognitive abilities. And when fathers provide even just routine childcare, like nothing like super special, that children have higher educational levels, economic achievements, they're more empathetic, they're socially competent. And these are true for kids from all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds, whether or not the mother is highly involved. And this was taken from Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In. And so I just want to just share that even in just seeing our girls, the way that they are being brought up, that it's so heartening and beautiful to see them blossom under the wings of a stay-home dad who's committed and who's a role model for them as well.
But I just want to probe about, just now you mentioned about your husband struggling in the playgroup and all that. Mm-hmm. So how do you cope with your husband on like normalizing this and your household roles?
Yeah. Thank you so much for asking that. Honestly, at the start, it was hard. It was just purely hard. We were both trying to navigate the different roles that we had. We don't have a domestic helper, which is also very odd, especially people who are in my field, like they're doctors and they're busy. Everybody has a domestic helper or two, Yeah, and so both of us, we are hands-on. We divide the household chores. So I do all the cooking and some of the cleaning, and he does different things, right? He does the laundry, and then when it comes to, we decided to homeschool our kids. Cliff and I, we do global humanitarian work as well. And so it was a joint decision that we made, that in the very early years of our children's lives, we wanted to be very present for them. So we co-homeschool. He does some, I do some. I'm very grateful that I have flexible work hours because I'm in public health. So I do have some of that flexibility, although COVID really threw things awry, especially in public health. But to answer your question, how did I help Cliff overcome? Honestly, in the early days, it was really just pure navigation, like both of us navigating one another. And I think something I appreciate is that every day we have this reconnection time after the kids are in bed. We really reconnect on like really deep issues that are in our hearts. And that's the time where we can talk about some of the painful or good incidents that have happened in the day. There was once I had to tell him that I just felt terrible at work when I had just gone into a new role and I had to meet the HR manager, and she somehow found out that I was a sole breadwinner. And her response, my goodness, I just wanted to run away. She was like, "Huh? No helper? Your husband at home? House husband? And I just wanted to run away and hide, like Kelvin.
So judgy, oh my goodness.
I was like, oh my gosh, I want to run away. I don't want to have this conversation. But I came home, I had to share this with my husband. And similarly, he has to share with me all these different things. In a strange way, it kind of bonds us even closer to each other. And I think that's the time where like the bedrock of your marriage is really tested. Because you have all these external pressures and stresses, right? And who else can we lean on but each other? And for us, God is really important. We have our spiritual faith to lean on. But I think, how did I help him overcome in practical ways? One is affirm his headship in the house. And his headship is not by how much money he earns or by, how his body shape looks like, so to speak, like Kelvin said. But rather, it's really, we acknowledge that we are a team. So even though I'm earning the money, so to speak, it's not like, oh, this is my money, and then this is your pocket money. No. We don't run it this way in our house. It's that we are a team. This is our strategy to raise our children. It is that, okay, my job earns more, and we wanted one parent to stay with the kids. So because of that, we are a team. We run the finances together. We make decisions financially together. And when it comes to homeschooling, the curriculum, the chores, the different kinds of things, we co-make decisions together. Secondly is what Kelvin mentioned just now, that recognizing that raising children and running a home is actually hard work.
It is.
So I don't say like, oh, my work is more important, therefore you have less leisure time. At the beginning, Cliff was just, he's such a sacrificial, giving, supportive and masculine man. But at the beginning, we had this mindset that, okay, because I'm working, he needs to like sacrifice and lay down more than me because I'm bringing in, the income for the family. And it very soon, very quickly, we could see that, look, this is not working. We are all human beings. And your work is as important as my work. And so it came to a point where I decided that I would draw certain boundaries at work and say, Cliff, this is your time to rest, because you need to rest just as much as I need to. And so both of us could mutually respect each other's work. So that's the second one. The third and the fourth ones would be honoring him for who he is, not what he does. Again, it's that sense of I see you. Your identity is not what you do, but who you are. And the last one is really grounding ourselves in our values. Like as a couple, we ask ourselves every night when we regroup, what do we value? And that kind of helps us to recenter our values, our thoughts, the center of our marriage, not on what people say about us, not on who says what about us, but in what we believe in. Those have been some really important things that have helped. Yeah.
Well, I think Wei Jia really summarized very well.
Yeah, it sounds
Exactly,
really awesome.
because it really does come back to, and I really resonated, especially that final point about the values, because that's really ultimately what it comes back down to. If you have the kind of values, such as what Wei Jia has shared, right, then this decision make as a family, as a team, makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we kind of hold our space, as family. We say that, okay, maybe society sings a different tune, but we are moving to the beat of our own drums. Actually, there's a greater narrative in terms of looking at the society as a whole. So what does Singapore represent? I mean, as a Singaporean, what do you identify as? What are really your values? Because that speaks, therefore, to how society responds to people like us who don't quite fit into the, the cookie cutter mode, you see. And we are the ones who are like literally party conversation stoppers. It's like, oh my gosh, what do you say to this stay-home parent, And afterwards, like, okay, can we like kind of move to the next table? Because if you're on a table with other people who are in the corporate world, right, the minute you say you're an educator, right, the conversation dries up. So can you imagine if I took another step and say, oh, by the way, I'm also a stay-home parent. Wow, to use a local vernacular, lucky worse. Just kind of like move away, And unfortunately, that is the reality.
Yep.
And that is the kind of stresses we face because we keep, as a society, Singapore, I think it is probably a first world problem. We measure our worth that way because it's so much easier to say, this is my title. Hi, who are you? Oh, I'm a lawyer. I'm a doctor. I do this and that. So those are the accepted professions. So as a society, we perhaps, starting with Wei Jia and myself, and we are challenging that narrative. Say, look, is it like that?
How did your wife and your kids cope with you go through this journey then?
There was an external trigger. My youngest, I have two boys, so Wei Jia and Cliff has two girls, I've got two boys. My boys are now 10 and 12 years of age. My youngest was diagnosed with moderate autism back in December of 2017. And there was a recognition that since we didn't know much about it, we had to investigate, understand this whole phenomenon of special needs much better. One of us had to be more present. So it was a very practical decision in the sense as a family.
Right.
Oh, but the 3 years of journey has been a roller coaster. But the beginning part was like, okay, and I thought after more than 12 years of full-time teaching, it was time to take a little break from that. And my wife agreed to go along with it, even though at that point I was still the one who was earning more. But we decided that the value is important. And I think particularly in the family where you're talking about sons, the role of the father actually increases in importance. Because
as a role model.
Yeah, because the sons, the little boys, are going to grow up to young men. And where are they going to get modeling behavior of how to be a man, except from their fathers? And since I came from a family where my father was emotionally distant, and the family is just a typical old Chinese family, obviously I'm not going to get anything from there. I have to create a new pathway, a new narrative, a new kind of a model, because I don't have anything to fall back on. So I've got to do my own research, I've got to understand this. So to me, my boys in the last 3 years, I've seen them blossom too. I've seen how they love the fact that daddy's always at home. I'm very close to my children. I mean, I had my children pretty late in life. It was 9 years into a marriage before my first one came along. So you can imagine how precious they are to us. So I'm sorry, and I will apologize to the majority of men who think that you can still make it. I know that there are those who do hold down full-time jobs, doing really well career-wise, and the children are still intact. But I think there are fissures, there are cracks that you sometimes don't see, and then later on in life it may pop up again. I certainly feel that way. So I think once my children, my wife, we sit down and talk about it, we agree that this is how it is, right? We move together as a unit, just like we move together, and I think that's what makes all the difference in the world. You have to have a family's background. I can't do this on my own,
Yeah, as Kelvin was sharing, something that I was thinking about is I also don't want to come across that, this is the model and we are better than others, right? That's not the point of this conversation. I mean, I'm sure many of your listeners are not stay-at-home dads or sole breadwinners as working wives. But I think the message that I admire in Cliff's life and Kelvin's life is that they allow their values to ground and to center them. And their lives are an outward expression of the values that are grounded in their lives in spite of external pressures. So I think the question that we each have to ask ourselves, and our responsibility, is to create a society where everybody is free to center their values in a grounded way and be able to be free to make decisions without this unnecessary stigma or misconception, so to speak.
Yeah, I think Kelvin brought up a point about perhaps some people would be saying that, oh, but my family is like the husband and wife are both working. So that seems to be quite a norm in Singapore.
Yeah, for sure.
So what you are trying to say is that perhaps we should embrace like different types of people, you know, some would prefer to stay at home, some prefer to work. And ultimately there's no like
Absolutely,
correct.
Kaixin. What I'm saying is that every family is unique. I'm not saying that we are co-homeschooling parents. You know, this is the way to go. You know, all the preschools in Singapore are lousy. No, that's not what we mean.
Shut down all the childcare centers.
No, that's not what we mean. We're not trying to be like hoity-toity or like, you know, we're so much better. But it's just that this is the decision that is good for our family because our family has a unique makeup. We have a unique history. We have a unique path moving forward. So it is a decision that we make.
I think I agree with her that I don't think that we are necessarily coming here to stamp our own on others.
No.
Every family is unique with unique situations, and every family has to make a decision on what they want to do moving forward. There's no judgment here. But then, of course, by the same token, before you judge us, take a look at us. Just really take a good long look and then see we are oftentimes making the kind of decisions we make based on what we know, based on what we have. And I think most families are trying their best. And I think we need to at least recognize that and celebrate that we're trying. And not to say that because this is the way it's always been, therefore this has to be the way it has to continue to be moving forward. And because if we keep having that, then we'll keep having stigmas, stereotypes, and stresses on the families that are not following the script the society has set upon us for centuries. I mean, this is 2021, moving 2022. We need to rethink how we look at each other.
I just want to pull out a little bit because, I mean, I got to know both of you, Kelvin and Wai Jia, from your commentaries. So after writing your commentaries, what were the reactions from your friends and families, and do you get much support from them?
Wow.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think she had a very unique experience that was a little different from mine based on the feedback. I actually didn't really get a lot of that. I mean, the immediate family or extended family members who knew about it, of course, were supportive. Asians being Asians, we're fairly polite. We were, even if it wasn't exactly representative of how they truly feel or necessarily the kind of thing that they themselves would adopt into their own family decisions processes, they will at least acknowledge, oh wow, good for you, you know, well-written piece, celebrating that, well done. But this is just a kind of a thank you thing. I didn't really get any backlashes or any kind of negative comments. I did comment that the title that was given for my commentary was not my original title. I think the editor was trying to push the button a bit, but I honored the intent of what he was trying to do because he's trying to reach an audience, a greater audience, to kind of push the envelope in terms of
what was your title again?
It has something to do with
masculinity, right?
Yeah, masculinity. How I didn't feel like a masculine, which made me feel like, oh my gosh, I'm the complete opposite of it. Goodness, you know. I said, whoa, when I first saw that time. But then I paused for a minute and said, okay, I know where he's coming from, and I mean,
it's a bit of more of a conventional thinking, right?
Trying to challenge it in a way. And of course, it brings the eyeballs. I mean, ultimately, it's still a commercial entity. So I recognize and respect that. And it did get that kind of reaction. But I think probably I'll pass it over to Wai Jia to talk about her commentary that came after mine and how that...
Thanks, Kelvin. It's funny you talked about the headline because I was also very shocked by the initial headline. So I actually discussed with the editor, and I was grateful that he was so kind to hear my feedback, that it was not only did I feel that it was dishonoring to my husband, but that I think a lot of people who supported us, who loved us, would be offended by it in some way. So I'm grateful that he took that feedback, because usually, you know, editors, they don't change headlines.
What was the original headline?
I don't remember the exact words, but I do know that it focused on the hardships. one thing I would say that really surprised me is that I think the piece, it had over 1,000 shares.
Wow.
That really surprised me. And the overwhelming support and love that we received was so wonderful. And that was really my heart. My heart was to honor my husband. And the fact that so much support came in for him, like vocally, was a huge thing for myself, for him. He also got to make lots of wonderful friends like Kelvin himself, So that for me was the highlight. But one thing I do struggle with, Kaixin, since you did ask me about stigmas and struggles as a working mum, something I do struggle with up to today is this perception that, and I actually read this in Sheryl Sandberg's book as well, that it's the same in America as it is here, that the image of a happy couple still includes a husband who is more professionally successful than his wife. And if the reverse occurs, it's perceived as threatening to the marriage. And I kind of sensed this at first, but I think recently it became a bit more prominent. So I had people texting me asking like, is your marriage doing okay?
Wow.
Whoa. And also, in the most recent lunch meeting, it was that, Wai Jia, you are publicly very visible. Like in terms of all your interviews, your speaking engagements, the things that you do, you are very publicly visible. Have you ever thought about putting in a bit more effort to make your husband more publicly visible as well?
Did they say in what manner or form they are thinking of for him to have a more public figure, coming forth more as a stay-at-home father advocate, or taking on the job?
I think
I don't know.
Well, I think what she was trying to say was that I needed to be a little bit less public to allow for my husband to be more public. And that kind of stunned me.
Is it more like the conventional gender roles that you want the men to
that was
to
what
be
I sensed.
stronger?
That was what I sensed. What I sensed was that in line with some of the comments that I do receive from people is that it is dangerous for a woman to be professionally and outwardly more so-called successful in the world's eyes than her husband.
I'm curious, is this person like your generation or older?
Older generation.
So it's my generation. Guilty as charged.
Guilty. But I don't blame her. I didn't feel bad.
Sure.
Actually, what I'm thankful for was that I have journeyed, and my journey as a sole breadwinner with Cliff as stay-at-home dad, we have matured. So these conversations don't sting us. In fact, I just looked at her, I smiled, thankfully I could very peacefully, with peace in my heart, joy on my face, tell her that, you know what, actually, Cliff and I have discussed this. And we are both secure in where we are. I don't want to raise girls who are going to hold back from the destiny that they're going to walk into because they fear upsetting not only society, but their husbands. I don't want my girls to be raised that way. I want to raise strong girls and strong women who are not afraid to step into who they are called to be. And likewise, I respect and I honor Cliff as head of the household because of his courage to stand firm in the face of going against culture for being who he is. And we joke between two of us, like, I don't need to go outside. I don't need to go to the public or other people to gain affirmation as to, am I a good wife? My yardstick is him and him alone. I think both him and myself, we have learned, we are continually learning to be secure in that and not to let what other people's perceptions of what a good wife should be or what a good husband. Because from time to time, I do struggle with this guilt that, how come you're not, doing more in like what a conventional wife should be doing.
Yeah, I think this really speaks to how a lot of things are actually unspoken. But when you encounter it, right, then you realize that, oh my gosh, all these stereotypes and stigmas inform the way people perceive you. Have we, as a society, actually even wondered why we automatically assume this to be the way that, oh no, the woman must allow the man to be more public, the man to step forward, or the man to automatically say that I'm in charge, I'm the king of the castle. You listen, no. So all these kind of things, how did it even get to that point that we just accept that as a norm? I think society needs to do a bit of soul searching. I felt actually that the whole COVID pandemic was supposed to be that pause button that was pressed on the world to start to recalibrate and re-examine. So what do we really hold precious and dear at the end of the day? All it took was this little simple virus to get us all locked down and with access to what we used to out there, all cut off. And isn't that therefore a great time to start to introspect, to be more circumspect in terms of how we have always perceived what is true, what is real, what is genuine. So I think that unfortunately might be a narrative that's disappearing as people are getting out of the COVID, getting vaccinated. Quickly, let's go back to pre-COVID life, forgetting that actually we really need to rethink. But I think, I'm not saying that I'm standing here as a martyr or standing as a strong advocate. I've got my bad days. I've got times when I just want to hand the children over to the mailman and say, okay, you take over. I can't manage the family because it's just crazy day to day. But I think in that struggle lies the reality of life. If we are more prepared to acknowledge the flaws, the imperfections, rather than trying to put on an appearance, we can move forward together as a humanity. Because I see you as what you're doing has value beyond, it may be different from my choices, and we agree to disagree sometimes, but at the end of the day, I want to respect you because at the end of the day, I want that too. And after many years in the profession, in the end, when you could have retired one day, right? So does it mean that the minute you retire from that glamorous, well sought after career, your value diminishes? Because if that is the point you come to, and I'm sad to say many people who retire do come to that, then oh my gosh, you missed out all the years where you could have re-examined and placed your own identity on something that's more permanent rather than temporal, which is unfortunately what a lot of people might still be in danger of thinking. Once they retire, then it's all gone. Then what do you do? Who you really are begins to surface out. I remember a friend telling me that, oh no, I'm going to retire. I don't know what to do. I'm like, wow, that's an interesting.
They lost their identity.
They're
right?
lost. They spend a whole day watching Netflix. They pine for those days where chauffeurs will come to the airport, pick them on a business trip because they're such senior executives, right? And with all the luggage taken care of. And they keep pining for those years that they've had and lost. And I'm like, wow, I hope that when I reach that stage, I've got more to ground myself on that is more important. So I think those are the things that we should be re-examining as a society.
Actually, I have one question. I wanted to ask, what do you think dads can do to be more active fathers at home? But I feel like I need to rephrase it, what can we do to support parents at home in this society?
Right.
What do you think?
I think the first thing I would say is to celebrate dads, to celebrate the role of fathers at home. I think that's really important as we shared, that even research shows that the role of the father is so important at home, generating more awareness about the importance of hands-on fathering, celebrating stay-at-home dads, welcoming this into our everyday media, our language, day to day. And the other thing is also I'm seeing this as from a woman's perspective, is to create headship for men at home. Because I think because of the way we are wired, it can very easily become that. I actually remember reading, I think Kelvin had written something about this, that sometimes it's easy to fall into this rhythm where the woman who is working also wants to look after the household chores and the kind of duties. And I think at the very beginning, I fell into that too. Because on one hand, I was trying to cope with work. And on the other hand, I realized that there is also this maternal drive, right, to want to settle things at home. And what I learned, which helped us so much tremendously, not only in our marriage, but in our rhythm, was creating space for the husband's headship at home.
Yeah.
So that means if we decide, not even I say, but we decide that we're going to share these responsibilities, then it will never be 50-50 exactly at all times, right? It's kind of like a seasonal, I give and you take, and we roll with it. We roll with this rhythm that we've come up with. But the key thing is that to allow husbands that sense of headship, that this role is not just delegated to me, or what they call maternal gatekeeping. Is like, social scientists, they come up with this term, but actually it just means let me do it because mommy knows best,
Right.
But rather giving the men the idea and the space and the leadership to do what they want. So at first I was like, maybe I need to come up with the curriculum for the kids and get all these things for them. And then, Cliff, can you help me with this? And that's so not helpful, right? But now my husband, he's owning that space. And it's about me learning to let go.
Right.
So I think if we want to invite men into the house, then as women, we also need to let go and allow them to step into that leadership role. So if Cliff wants to use newspaper and to make paper mache and explode a volcano in the middle of our living room, I say, okay, because this is your time and your space, you know.
Yeah.
So that's how we learn to roll with it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what's happening in my home as well. And it's interesting that we talked about earlier about the Institute of Policy Studies last year that was about stay-at-home fathers, right? Interesting that most of the interviewees actually shared that even though they are stay-at-home fathers, right, perception-wise, they still see themselves in a secondary role at home compared to their breadwinning, earning wives. So which means that when the wives return back from a long day's work, right, they just switch gear and it's like a second shift. And that typically happens. And I mean, I'm not really judging that. I understand where that comes from. And I know that it is a challenge. And it is so because of the fact that we have always embraced those stereotypical gender identities. And so we just automatically go into that mode. But I think I like what Wei Jia says, and it's really about increasingly creating that space. So it's no longer a 50-50, it's a 100-100 because you each put everything into it. But the 100 that you give it, the 100 I give may not look the same.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to look the same. It doesn't have to, because we bring our innate gender strengths into the family, into the parenting, and that's how it makes it a more complete picture rather than you dichotomize, you draw very clear division lines across. I think it gets very difficult because after all you're trying to see, okay, how much have you done? How much have you not done? You know, why are you lying on the couch now, like a couch potato? Why are you doing this? And I think families, if we at least are aware of this, we start to walk around it. And I love what she just shared about her family. And I think it's kind of happening in mine too, kind of see that we can play those roles, we can alternate. And just from the perspective of the children, at least, they see that this is a unit, this is a unified thing. No, we don't get it straight. Some days, daddy and mommy are each other's throats, or they are trying to chase us out of the house because we're such crazy kids, and we're just, there are all these kind of dynamics. So it's a roller coaster, but that's life. But that's where it gets real. I mean, this is really where it is, and we shouldn't try and sugarcoat over it, because I mean, it's hard. This parenting is a hard thing. It's always been. And in the world that's increasingly confusing now and diversified, all the more so it is. So we need to help our children navigate. Let's model those behaviors where we're flexible, adaptable, and willing to look at things differently. Throw out conventions we have to, but try to, at the same time, hold core values at the center and not move on those.
Okay, so in conclusion, I just would like to ask, what's your wish list? What do you wish for the government? What are some policy changes would you want to see how we can better support fathers who are at home and how we can help them take care of children?
Wow.
Oh, that's a tall order, tough questions there.
I mean, the first thing I would say is to include voices of stay-at-home dads, to really celebrate them and to hear their voices. And I think we're moving in the right direction. The fact that we are having even this podcast, I think it's great. It's funny, my husband and I, we discussed this, and we said actually the cheapest way, the most, the lowest hanging fruit, but it would be so wonderful, is to see proper labels of verbiage in society. You don't need to spend money on that. But in terms of, there was one time he was at a bank and he had to fill up his occupation. There was a field for housewife.
No house husband.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't, he was looking for stay-at-home dad. And then he had no choice but to write unemployed. And that, I think, is very stigmatizing. It's very difficult for someone to see that they are unemployed. So I think having the option that for a stay-at-home dad to write stay-at-home dad would be wonderful. Mums and Tots groups can be renamed Parents and Tots to include fathers as well. Having stay-at-home dad support groups, and where I work, there is at my workplace, there is something called a WISH team, WISH. It's like Women in Science and Healthcare, where they look into women equity issues. And so to look into equity for women opportunities, women like myself, for example, who might find it difficult to progress in the workplace because, I'm very fortunate, but other women may not have that luxury if, for example, if they felt that torn between two places, they have to manage the home and then they also are the sole breadwinner. Right. It's very difficult. So I think these would be my few suggestions on my wish list.
Great. How about Kelvin?
Wow, I think that's a really tough question, to be honest. And I like the way what Wai Jia has suggested, but I think there are a lot of factors to consider. I mean, the government, the policymakers need to. We talk a lot about having more family-friendly kind of policies, and I think it's certainly has happened in Singapore, and it's getting better. But I think more needs to be done on the side of employers to get employers to accept that sometimes your employees, the male employees, need to be off work to take care of the family and stuff. But I think that is a very tough front because employers are typically bottom line driven, and the worst thing about these things is that oftentimes if you have to leave to care for the family or that, the work gets passed on to another disgruntled colleague, which over time, and then you get these kind of new labels on you, like, you're a non-team player because you keep disappearing because of family needs. I actually knew one stay-home father that exactly had that experience, so much so that in the end, it got so pressurizing, he had to quit because the employer just basically said, you're not pulling your weight. And so the thing is, I think this is tough because I think that employers do what they need to do, and then there are things to meet, KPIs, the bills to pay and stuff like that. But unfortunately, if we run at that kind of pace in a first world economy like Singapore's, where everybody kind of pretty much does like three people's jobs in order for the economy to be a first world economy, then we will always come up against these kind of challenges for men who may choose maybe a slower pace, a man who may choose to take on only half time, not to be stigmatized. Unfortunately, I think it's very hard. So my eyes are employers out there to say that, can you rethink how you look at the male employees? I mean, I've met bosses. I mean, I've had bosses who will tell you that, let the siblings take care of each other lah, or just...
or ask the mother, right?
Yeah, just, why are you the one doing this kind of things? And, you're the guy. And so again, then all those typical stereotypes come back to the fore. And then, so it's a vicious cycle. It never finishes. So where do you draw the line? So my appeal to employers is, and I don't want to be shot for this, is that, can you please rethink how you value your employees? Can we work out more flexi arrangements? I mean, surely COVID has forced a lot of us to rethink a lot of these things, right? Do we actually need that physical office space? Do we actually need this kind of things? I mean, there are drawbacks for sure, but if we want to see a change in how society embraces parents who take on roles like we do, then let's do that. Let's be kind, let's be more gracious. But until we reach a point in society where those really are our core values, right? We can talk a lot about it, but in the actual, on a day-to-day basis and on the ground, right? If you are getting sideline for promotion, if you're getting bonuses are not coming, you get these subliminal signals from your place of employment, right? Then we'll never be able to redress
Nobody will ever
this.
have kids.
Nobody have kids, which is already a problem in Singapore, right? And it's just going to compound the situation. Then I'm sorry. Then those of us who insist on it may have to make tough decisions like we do, which have definitely has affected my family bottom line in a way, but we manage. So, but these are the sacrifices we are willing to make because we want to see something more out of it. So as a society, I think these are the things we need to deal with. And like I said earlier, if the government or the employers can declare a stipend for parenting at home, right? Full-time parenting, even if it's a token sum, I'm talking about actual money.
That's the ultimate wish list, right?
Yeah, so because that will signal in no uncertain terms that there is an economic value to what you do, whereby the economic values outcome will not be seen to the next generation, but when you get to that generation, what a society, what an inclusive, embracing society we have, right? Then I think that's an ideal worth chasing after if indeed we embrace it. So to me, that's a clear sign. And of course, we have also talked about how 2 weeks paternity leave is simply not enough. So those things can change, and there are policymakers in a position where they can make that kind of change, but the courage and the will to make that happen, well, that I think remains to be seen, but I'm hopeful. I may not see my time, but hopefully my children can see it when they grow up. Yeah.
Yes. So I guess to summarize, the ultimate dream is to see a society where men and women can be free to be who they are, anchored in their values, one that celebrates their identities, their work, but also their families.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kelvin and Wai Jia, for coming here. Thank you for your time today. It's really enriching, a lot of sharing, a lot of personal journey. Thank you all for listening in. See you on the next episode of On Diversity. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Kaixin.
you.
On Diversity is a podcast inspired by the Institute of Policy Studies Managing Diversity's research program. Please follow or subscribe to the On Diversity podcast to get notified when we have a new episode. You can visit our website ipscommons.sg for more info.